My name is Brooke, and I have been coaching the SAT for over 20 years. I've scored perfectly on the test as an adult, and I've coached students to perfect scores on the SAT. And today, I'm going to share with you in this video some of my tips for how to get a 750 plus on the reading section. This is my bread and butter. That's the #1 kind of category of score that I get, is people who are trying to get that elusive 1550 plus score. I have plenty of students who are doing it constantly, and I'd love to share some of my tips with you. So in this video, I'm going to go over 3 tips. I usually only share these in my paid seminars, but I'm sharing them with you today. Subscribe and like this video if you find this helpful as you go. Let's get into this. Tip #1 is simplify the passage, and any information for that matter. Whenever I am approaching the SAT, one of the things that we're dealing with is too much information. You've got all of these questions, you've got an entire passage, you've got a question and the question stem, you've got a little blurb at the top of the passage. There's so much information all over the place. And your job is to try to make questions and passages simpler and easier to deal with. My goal is always to distill information down so that I am juggling as little information as possible. I'm always trying to boil everything down to get to what matters most. So I'm going to show you how I do that on one question. My whole goal here is to really reduce my mental load. And this is a question about black beans. I feel like it was one of the first practice questions that the College Board released when they announced the digital SAT. I pulled all of the examples, by the way, from the College Board question bank. If you haven't checked that out, it's one of the best resources to prep for the SAT. It's totally free from the College Board. You can find the link in the blog, which the link for that is in the description. We always have a blog that goes with our videos. You can check out all my tips and all my links there. So I'm going to read this. Black beans, I'm not reading that, are a nutritionally dense food, but, trigger word, they are difficult to digest in part because of their high levels of cellular fiber and compounds like raffinose. So I have a because of, this is cause and effect. So whenever I have cause and effect, I want to write that down. And I'm going to just start taking some notes down here. Difficult to digest, right? Because of soluble fiber and raffinose, etc. Okay? So I'm going to keep going. But you see how I'm kind of like taking notes? But I just want to digest this down, no pun intended, to the things that are most important, right? To these simpler ideas. They also contain anti-nutrients like tannins and trypsin inhibitors. So I'm just going to say bad over here, okay? And I'm just going to list what's bad because there's a lot of technical things here. I'm not going to memorize all these. The other thing is if I look down at my answer choices, I can see trypsin inhibitors, tannins, non-fermented beans, raffinose, like all these lactobacillus. So I'm going to have to regurgitate these ideas. So I'm going to write down what they are. These are tannins, trypsin inhibitors. So the other thing I know is if trypsin inhibitors are bad, then guess what must be good? Trypsin is probably good if those are trypsin inhibitors. So I'm just going to write good over here. And I'm just going to add that to my list of good. Trypsin itself, which interfere with the body's ability to extract nutrients from foods. In a research article, these people, and I'm always skipping over names and like proper names. If I need those proper names, I'll go back to them. It's a short enough passage. I don't think there's anybody else in this paragraph. All these people claim that inducing fermentation of black beans using lactic acid bacteria. So fermentation of black beans improves the digestibility of beans and makes them more nutritious. So what we're going to say is fermentation. I'm just going to write this down. Fermentation makes black beans more digestible. So guess what I probably need to get out? I'm going to anticipate my answer before I look down. So that means I need to get rid of my fiber and raffinose. And then this leans to more nutrition, right? So if it's more nutritious, I probably have less of the bad and more of the good, right? Something like that. So I already have kind of my stuff mapped out. And now I'm going to go through the answer choices. But because I've reduced and boiled down my information to sort of all of these keywords and what's going on, and I've made little arrows and I've made a little chart, and it seems like this might be time consuming. And I agree that like the way that I'm doing it right here might be a little bit time consuming. Sometimes I do this reduction on paper, particularly for command of evidence. I usually do like scratch chicken notes, and sometimes I abbreviate big time. Like I might do SF for soluble fiber or RF for raffinose or something like that. So I'm doing it a little bit more spelled out here. And sometimes I internalize this or I subvocalize it. Like this is what I'm subvocalizing. So there's a range between how much do you take notes or highlight versus how much do you just keep in your head. But the process is the same, which is the idea that I'm trying to narrow all of the information that I'm dealing with. You can see here I just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So I've got like 23 words. That's probably half of the length of this. So I've distilled it down into the 23 words that matter. I'm trying to really get the information to a like more focused clump so I know exactly what I'm looking for and what I'm dealing with. Which finding from these two people's research, if true, would most directly support their claim. So I want to support, this is really important that I don't screw that up. So I want to support their claim, and this is their claim, that we ferment things and then boom, we have more digestible. So I want something to do with the more digestible probably. When cooked, fermented beans contain significantly more trypsin inhibitors and tannins, okay, but significantly less soluble fiber and raffinose than non-fermented beans. So fermented beans have more trypsin and tannins. They have more of the bad stuff. That makes no sense. That can't make it less bad and more good. Definitely wrong. Fermented beans contain significantly less soluble fiber and raffinose. Okay, yeah, they were difficult to digest because of these. So more digestible means I want to get rid of those. Exactly. And when cooked, the fermented beans also displayed a significant reduction in trypsin inhibitors and tannins. That was in my bad column. I want to reduce that, right? I wanted less bad. So that directly lines up with all the things I wrote down. I am really liking B. C, when the fermented beans were analyzed, they were found to contain 2 microorganisms, these lactobacillus, that are theorized to increase the amount of nitrogen absorbed by the gut after eating beans. So this sounds like something that's cool and that could be good. And maybe the nitrogen is making it more digestible. But here's the problem, you guys. I don't know if nitrogen is good or bad. It's not on my list. It's what I call out of scope. And when I find things that are out of scope, they're dangerous. They could be wrong. On an inference question, maybe they're right if there's nothing else that works. But I really want to be careful about specifics that aren't mentioned in the passage anywhere. They could be really dangerous. And I have no idea what the impact of nitrogen is and whether it has anything to do with making things more nutritious. And also, this is just telling me like what's in the fermented beans, but does it tell me that it's improved the digestibility of the beans or that it's making them more nutritious? And I don't have enough information to know the connection between nitrogen and that idea. So this one is dodgy because it's got that weird specific that I don't have any evidence for. Both fermented and non-fermented black beans contain significantly fewer trypsin inhibitors and tannins after being cooked at high pressure. But here's the problem. This says both fermented and non-fermented. I don't want non-fermented black beans to also have good things going on. I want the fermented beans to be the healthier beans because that's the whole idea, that the fermentation creates the digestibility, not that both of these get digestible when cooked. So this isn't supporting the idea. And B is so on target. You see, when I reduce things down, when I boil it down and I see exactly what my scope is, I'm going to pick an answer choice in that scope and find the answer. And part of the idea is that these are short enough that you can kind of process the whole thing sometimes. And you don't always have to read the whole thing, but on these command of evidence questions, this is one technique that I'm using. In any case, I'm always trying to reduce down what is it that I need? What is the information that I'm looking at? Reduce, reduce, reduce. That's tip 1. Okay, we're going to go on to tip 2, which is what I call flags. I'm going to teach you one kind of flag. I'm not going to get to all my flags because that would take a half hour. Flags are words that the College Board uses in SAT questions to make answer choices dodgy or wrong. And there's particular categories of words that tend to be the go-tos for College Board question writers. And the first flag that I'm going to talk about today, or the only flag, because we don't have time for all of them, is comparisons. We're going to look out for comparisons in the answer choices because they are dangerous. Okay, scientists studying Mars long thought the history of its crust was relatively simple. One reason for this is that the geologic and climate data collected by spacecraft showed that the crust was largely composed of basalt. So one reason for this is crust was basalt, and so we thought the history was simple, right? History of crust is simple because the crust is basalt. Likely a result of intense volcanic activity that brought about a magma ocean, which cooled to form the planet's surface. So they theorized at this time it was just the magma ocean, and it was a simple explanation, and there was lots of basalt at the end. A study led by this lady focused on additional information, further analysis of data, blah, 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 on Mars' surface that revealed the presence of surprisingly high concentrations of silica. So boom, but we found some silica, some additional information in certain regions. Such a planetary surface that formed in a mostly basaltic environment would be unlikely to contain large amounts of silica. Thus, it can't have formed in all a basaltic environment. That's what she's going to conclude, right? So first of all, I'm anticipating what comes next. These logically completes the text. These are our inference questions. I'm always trying to come up with my perfect answer right here before I look down. And so that's what I'm going to do right away. So I'm going to say she concluded that if this was simple, that it's more complex. So I'm using my keyword up there, that there's a more complex explanation, and that it wasn't mostly basaltic, it was partially basaltic, because this is saying that it was simple, this was it, but we have this additional information, so there's more going on. There's a more complex explanation than just the magma ocean. Okay, there's my perfect answer. Again, I'm rolling off this keyword in my introductory sentence. Introductory sentences are great. They can have these like wonderful keywords. And all this distilling is like what I showed you in my first tip, right? That I'm cutting this up and I'm breaking it down into the most important pieces so that I really hone in on the main ideas, right? And those keywords, which we're going to talk about keywords next. This is one kind of keywords. There's lots of keywords in this test. A, the information about silica concentrations collected by the spacecraft is likely more reliable than silica information gleaned from the infrared wavelengths on Mars' surface. So this is saying that one kind of data is better than another kind of data. There is no indication that she's digging into anybody's methodology or the accuracy of data. This is totally off topic. And the other thing that I have here is a comparison. And comparisons are dodgy on the SAT. They must be explicitly stated. And if anything is not explicit and it is a comparison, you can't infer it. You cannot infer a comparison. And I can't talk about reliability. That's not even in scope. And because it's a comparison, I can confidently get rid of A. B, high silica concentrations likely formed, I like the word likely, from a different process than that which formed the crust of other planets. Where in the world did other planets come from? This is a comparison than, right? We're comparing the idea of Mars to other planets. Guess what's never mentioned? Other planets. It's out of scope. It's a comparison that's just nowhere to be found here. And it's wrong. And because I know comparisons are dodgy and they must be explicit, and because I see the thing being compared to isn't even in the passage, it never talks about other planets, I get rid of that answer choice so fast, you guys, I don't even give it a whistle. C, having a clearer understanding of the composition of Mars's crust and the processes by which it formed will provide more insight into how Earth's crust formed. Why in the world are we talking about Earth? This is out of scope. Is this a comparison? Maybe, kind of, but it's certainly an out-of-scope detail that's super random, and I don't know where it came from. Mars's crust likely formed as a result of other major geological events in addition to additional information, I like how those key together, in the cooling of the magma ocean. Yeah, it's not just a magma ocean. It's more complex than that. This is closest to perfect. Boom, I am right. I am there, and the answer choice is D. But you can see how when I know that comparisons are dodgy, it helps me eliminate other answer choices really quickly that I might have spent more time on. And as soon as I know that that comparison is not on the page, it's nowhere to be found, it's out of scope kind of details, I get to move on really quickly, okay? My third tip is focus on keywords. So you saw when I was distilling information, I was finding keywords. Even when I did that last question, I was highlighting the words that matter. Highlighting the words that matter is so important. We're going to talk about it in words and context now, because keywords can operate in different ways, right? Keywords can even mean a lot of different things, and that's fine. Keywords can be words that matter most when I'm like reducing the passage, but they can also be words that inform where the blank is. So when I do these words and context questions, I have a blank and I want to look at all the words that are sort of resonant with that, opposite of that have a relationship with it. They can also be what I call signal words, words like conjunctions, but, however, though, contrast signals, time cues, anything like that. Also words that define what I need. So when I'm in rhetorical strategy questions, for example, and I have a question stem and it says, which of the following uses information from the text to underscore a recent development, whatever it is, those are keywords in my question of what I'm looking for. So I want to focus on keywords, and this I'm going to show you in my words and context how that works. All right, so some scientists have suggested that mammals in the Mesozoic were not a very blank group. So I have some negatives in here. So they were not blank, but this guy suggests that early mammals living in the shadow of dinosaurs were not all ground-dwelling insectivores. So it's a little bit confusing because we've got some negatives and things like that, but I know that these are my key words, right? So they've said they're not very blank, but then they say they weren't all this. Fossils of various plant-eating mammals have been found, including this, which he says could glide like a flying squirrel. So this is various plant-eating mammals. So ground-dwelling insectivores are different from plant-eating mammals. So some scientists have said they're not a very blank group, but this guy found that we even had various plant-eating mammals. So this could be they're not a very varied group. you see how I do this? Because I have various. And I'm working off the various, and this is my key word. They're not a very varied group, even though this guy found that they had various plant-eating mammals. It says they weren't all ground-dwelling insectivores, so this is saying they were all the same thing, but he's saying, no, they weren't all this, but contrast signal, they were not. So I have double negative, 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 ground-dwelling. So we originally believed that they were all ground-dwelling insectivores, which means they were not a very varied group. Do you see? I've got to figure out, you see this is confusing. I've got to figure out how all these double negatives are interacting. We have a but, they were not all like this. So many people thought they were this, which would be ground-dwelling insectivores. So this whole box, I also sometimes like to box it out like this when it gets confusing with these negatives. I'll box out the whole thing. And then I can like make a note for myself. They were all grounded insectivores there. I'm going to make it shorter. So they're all grounded insectivores. I can make a little note. And so this box means they're all grounded insectivores. So that means they're not a very diverse group. Something like that. And I take the whole box, right? And that's this. But he said that's not true. They weren't all boring. Fossils of various these have been found. So I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for varied. And then we have predatory, no. Obscure, no, which means just like people don't know about it or it's very random. Nobody's heard of it. Diverse, yes, that's my varied, or localized. That's just kind of weird. But you can see how fast I can get the answer choice if I map it out up here. So again, the idea is find your keywords. When you have double negatives, you can box out the whole thing and then kind of figure out what the relationship is between the whole box here. When you have double negatives like but, we're not, be careful and kind of chart it out and find the easiest thing to work that blank off of. And you too can solve a hard words and context question. So find your keywords, map it out. I hope you guys like this video. If so, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok. We've got lots of social media posts all over the place. But I think some of our best content is here in our long forms on YouTube, where I try to give you guys the most tips possible totally for free. Check out some of our free resources. We have free cheat sheets and the like, supertutortv.com/free. I hope to see you guys soon. Thanks for watching. Tell us what you want to hear more about, what you want to see videos on in the comments, and I'll see you soon.